Way before anyone worried about oil prices, economic crashes, or lines drawn across continents, real power came from something much simpler, controlling where water went. I'm talking literally here, not some poetic metaphor. The people who controlled water got to decide who could grow crops, who could build towns, who survived, and who had to pack up and leave, or worse. Today, everyone talks about water conflicts like they re some future threat linked to global warming or too many people on the planet. But here's what they're missing. Water has been a weapon of politics since the beginning. It's always been divided up, always been restricted, and always been worth fighting for. Not because there wasn't enough of it, but because someone figured out how to control it. Here's what most people overlook. Water does and hand you power just by sitting there in a river. Power comes when you organize it, redirect it, store it behind walls, and decide who doesn't get it. The second ancient societies figured this out, they also figured out how to dominate. Welcome to a place where wealth, control, and the past crash into each other, and nothing is straightforward. Human civilization didn't kick off with merchants trading goods, it started with irrigation channels. The world's first cities didn't pop up in the most fertile spots or the nicest climates. They appeared where people learned to tame water. Think about Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, China's Yellow River region. These weren't random lucky locations. These were early tests in how to control nature. Rivers would flood without warning, wipe out entire harvests, and leave behind crusts of salt. Without human intervention, they killed just as easily as they gave life. To make it work, people had to come together. Channels needed digging, walls needed constant upkeep, floods needed predicting. Someone had to make the call on when water flowed, where it traveled, and who got to use it. That someone became the boss? In early Mesopotamia, irrigation systems stretched across miles of bone-dry land, transforming wasteland into farmable fields. But here's the thing, channels don't take care of themselves. They need workers, perfect timing, and someone enforcing the rules. If one city upstream took too much, the city below it would face famine. If a channel broke during flood season, you'd end up with either muddy swamps or cracked earth. Managing water wasn't about saving the environment, it was pure politics. City-states went to war over irrigation systems just like later empires battled over harbors. Destroying an enemy's water channels could work better than battering down their gates. You didn't have to invade their territory, just cut off their water supply. Ancient leaders understood this early, and they actually wrote it into their laws. The Code of Hammurabi, one of humanity's oldest legal codes, is packed with rules about water rights, channel maintenance, and punishments for screwing up. If a landowner didn't maintain his irrigation ditch and it caused flooding, he paid for the mess. If his carelessness destroyed someone else's crops, he owed compensation. Mishandling water wasn't just stupid, it was a crime. That tells you exactly what you need to know. Water had become infrastructure, and infrastructure meant power. Egypt took this concept even further. The Nile flooded on schedule, but predictable doesn't mean easy. How high the flood rose determined the harvest size. Harvest size determined how much tax could be collected. Tax collection determined how strong the government could be. Pharaohs didn't maintain their grip through religious stories alone, they stayed in power by controlling calendars, measuring flood levels, and managing grain reserves. Good floods meant a strong state. Failed floods cracked their authority wide open. This wasn't about belief systems, it was pure logistics. Over in China, historians eventually labeled what emerged there the hydraulic state. Enormous public projects, channels, dams, flood barriers demanded centralized control and thinking decades ahead. The government workers who managed water became the skeleton holding the empire together. These officials weren't just paper pushers, they were flow controllers. Master the river, master the population. The Roman Empire used different tactics but reached the same conclusion. Aqueducts weren't primarily built for luxury bathing, they were built to keep things stable. Cities hooked into Roman water systems became cities locked into Roman control. Keeping everything running required imperial money. Getting access required political obedience. Water might flow downhill naturally, but power flowed straight back to Rome, and when the water shut off, those cities emptied out fast. Here's the critical point modern storytelling usually misses. These ancient societies didn't fight wars over water because they were running out. They fought because water systems created leverage points. True scarcity was almost never the real issue. Control was the only thing that mattered. As irrigation networks expanded, populations exploded. As populations grew, dependency got deeper. More mouths to feed meant more food needed. More food needed meant tighter water coordination. Coordination required someone in charge. Being in charge meant demanding obedience. This cycle created incredible stability for a while. But it also created brittleness, because once a society rebuilds itself around a centralized water network, failure turns catastrophic. When a channel fills with silt, when a dam gives way, when political fighting stops maintenance work, the whole structure stands exposed. This is the moment water stops being your source of strength and becomes your path to destruction. In Mesopotamia, generations of irrigation slowly killed the soil. Salts built up as water dried out, harvests got smaller. Farmers gave up on wheat and switched to barley, a quiet surrender to environmental damage that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Over time, the agricultural foundation supporting those cities crumbled, even while government demands stayed exactly the same. The system functioned perfectly until suddenly it didn't. Across the ocean in Mesoamerica, the Maya constructed elaborate reservoir networks and water storage to survive the dry seasons. These systems kept large populations alive in delicate environments. But extended droughts, mixed with greedy elites and inflexible political structures, shoved the system beyond breaking point. When water failed, so did their leaders' credibility. Angkor in Southeast Asia engineered one of history's most advanced pre-modern water systems. Huge reservoirs, elaborate channels, and flood controls supported a massive urban civilization for hundreds of years. But that same complexity became their weakness. Shifting weather patterns and political chaos disrupted upkeep. The system got clogged. Floods and droughts started alternating. The cities slowly drained of people. Not in one dramatic moment, quietly. That's the pattern worth remembering. Water systems don't explode in spectacular fashion. They deteriorate slowly, then all at once. The early warnings are boring as hell. Maintenance budgets get slashed. Coordination falls apart. Small problems pile up. By the time everyone notices the crisis, it's already too late to adapt. This isn't just dusty ancient history that doesn't matter anymore. It's a blueprint. Because when a society centralizes control over something as essential as water, it's not just centralizing survival. It's centralizing every major decision. Maintenance schedules turn into political calculations. Access becomes a negotiating tool. Investment follows influence. And neglect quietly piles up everywhere else. That pattern never went away. It just got bigger. In today's world, water doesn't move through hand-carved channels or seasonal flooding anymore. It's managed through massive dams, international agreements, pricing mechanisms, and infrastructure crossing national borders. But the core logic hasn't changed one bit. Whoever controls upstream controls downstream. Whoever controls the flow controls everything that follows. This is why so many modern conflicts that appear ideological or geopolitical are actually about water underneath. Look at rivers crossing international boundaries. The Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus, the Mekong, these aren't just waterways. They're economic lifelines. Farming, electricity, industry, and city life all depend on them. When one country builds a dam upstream, they're not simply making electricity. They're rewriting who has leverage. The conflict doesn't begin with running out of water. It begins with imbalance. Upstream countries gain options. Downstream countries inherit all the risk. And that power imbalance reshapes every negotiation long before anyone mentions military action. Treaties turn into financial tools. Water release schedules become political messages. Infrastructure becomes another form of diplomacy. Nothing screams strategic advantage quite like deciding when your neighbor's crops get watered. This is where the comparison to money becomes impossible to miss. Just like early governments learned to control water flows, modern governments learn to control money flows. Liquidity, credit, energy, shipping routes, digital data all follow identical patterns. Centralize the system, maximize efficiency. Count on stability. then act shocked when disruption creates political chaos. Water pricing gives us a perfect example. In many modern cities, water isn't treated as something everyone shares anymore. It's managed like an asset on a balance sheet. Utility companies invest, borrow money, and recover costs by charging users. On paper, this increases efficiency. In reality, it introduces new fragility, affordability. When prices climb faster than what people earn, access becomes divided by class. When maintenance gets delayed to protect profit margins, failures become widespread. When infrastructure stays invisible, voters don't notice things rotting until their taps go dry. At that point, the issue never gets presented as a budget problem. It gets framed as a crisis of trust. The same pattern that destroyed ancient water-based states shows up again. The system didn't fail because water disappeared, it failed because how it was distributed broke people's trust. This explains why modern water crises usually involve bad management rather than actual shortage. The reservoirs are full, the pipes exist. The engineers are available. What breaks down is coordination between different agencies, misaligned incentives, and nobody planning ahead. Efficiency got rewarded. Backup systems got eliminated. Maintenance got pushed to next year's budget. The system hummed along until it stopped humming. And when it stopped, consequences rippled everywhere. Food costs spike when irrigation stumbles. Energy costs follow when hydropower production drops. Inflation spreads through the entire economy not as a sudden shock but as a domino effect. Regular people don't see this as failed policy, they see it as chaos. At that point, politicians scramble for explanations. Someone needs blaming. Someone must have hoarded resources. Someone must have made terrible calculations. And sometimes that's actually true, but the real cause usually runs deeper than that. The system was optimized for perfect conditions and shattered under pressure. This is the lesson history keeps teaching and we keep refusing to learn. Societies don't crumble because they depend on resources. They crumble because they confuse control with permanence. Ancient kings believed channels would always flow as long as their authority held strong. Modern leaders believe infrastructure will always function as long as financing models stay clever. Both are partially right and dangerously mistaken because flows aren't frozen in place. Climate shifts, demand changes, political incentives warp decisions. And systems designed for yesterday's challenges can't handle tomorrow's unpredictability. That's where financial errors multiply. Investments chase maximum efficiency. Markets price in continuous stability. Institutions assume the future will basically resemble the past with slightly better technology. Meanwhile, the most vital systems grow more complex, more centralized, and more fragile. Water makes this brutally obvious because you can't fake it, you can't print more of it. You can't substitute it with financial instruments. When it stops flowing, reality crashes in. And when reality crashes in, it doesn't bargain. The uncomfortable truth running through all of this isn't that scarcity triggers conflict. It's that control breeds dependency. Dependency breeds vulnerability. The civilizations that lasted longest weren't the ones with the most impressive engineering. They were the ones that kept backup options, maintained multiple sources, spread out access, and stayed humble enough to expect things to go wrong. That applies equally to water and to money. History doesn't reward systems that run flawlessly under perfect circumstances. It rewards systems that break gracefully. And that's the perspective worth holding on to. Because the next major conflict rarely shows up announcing itself as a resource war. It shows up as a budget disagreement, a treaty renegotiation, a delayed repair project, a price adjustment, something technical, something mundane, until suddenly it's not. If this shifted how you see things, hit that subscribe button. History holds the answers, and I'll keep showing you exactly where to find them.